Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Assata Worrell, and she has a job unlike any other person that I've ever had on the channel. She is a medical and scientific illustrator and the founder of Legacy BioStudios. So instead of verbal communication, she actually is all about visual communication. So I'm really interested to talk to her about how she got into medical illustration and what all that entails. So welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Assata.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that your degree is in biological pre-medical illustration. This is something I've never heard of before, so I'm curious to find out more about it. How'd you get into it?
Kind of very serendipitously. So originally I was going to go to, I went to Iowa State University. I'm born and raised in Iowa. And I grew up actually in a Hawkeye household. So anybody that's from Iowa, they go, oh, that's crazy. That's rival schools. So it came to the point where I was ready to graduate from high school, and I decided, well, I want to do some kind of engineering. And I decided originally software engineering was what I wanted to work in. So I applied to Iowa State. I got in. I was a scholarship holder. I received the George Washington Carver Scholarship. And so for me, a big part of it is you have to keep really good grades in order to maintain your scholarship. So I started taking classes, the math classes that I needed in order to get to the engineering classes. And very early on, it became very evident that I was not having as good of a time as other students. And it later turned out that I have dyscalculia. So it's like dyslexia, but it's with numbers instead of with letters. And I realized that one, I might not be able to keep my scholarship if I wasn't able to keep the grades up. And that for me, I was like, okay, I need to pivot. So I decided, what did I always love? What do I need to go back to my basics. I knew I always loved art. I knew I always loved science and medicine. So I figured, let's just take some bio classes. Maybe I'll be a pre-med student. Let's take some art classes. Maybe I'll do graphic design or something. And let's go from there. So I started taking the 2D visual illustration class. That's one of the fundamentals of the design program at Iowa State. And I'm sitting there, we're drawing boxes, and this man walks in. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't say anything. He just kind of starts walking around the classroom, and he tells everybody, okay, get up. And he sits where you're sitting, and he would look at your boxes, and he'd either say, this is good, or he would say, this is terrible, you need to figure something out, you're not fit for drawing, or he would say nothing. And so at this point, I had just found out that I wasn't going to be able to be a software engineer. So I was okay, I'm okay with him saying nothing to me. I'm okay being mediocre and him just saying, it's fine, it's not special, but it's not bad. But he sat down, he's like, oh, these are really great boxes. I go, oh, thank you. And he goes on to say, do you like science? And I was, yeah, I like science. I'm taking some bio courses. And he's like, you need to look into the BPMI program. And he just like got up and left, which is kind of that weird, okay, I'm intrigued, but this was a very weird interaction. I don't understand. I don't even know who you are. But that was like a 9 a.m. studio. By the time 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had transferred all my credits and I was officially a pre-biological, pre-medical illustration student. Because you have to actually apply to get into the program in order to graduate with the degree. But the following year, I walked into my first official BPMI class, and this man was sitting at the front of the classroom. Of course, I was late because they had moved the class and I was running behind already, and I was trying to find where this classroom was. And he sees me come in. I'm trying to sneak into the back room, and he's like, oh, hey, boxes. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Yeah, you remember me. And he's like, yeah, I remember you. Go sit in the back of the class. And that's kind of the very beginning of what I kind of call my very accidental, serendipitous introduction into illustration. And it ended up being, he was actually one of the best teachers I ever had. He was always very honest, which I always valued. He was also very supportive in the sense that he was always like, make mistakes, keep working, keep learning. And that's something that I try to hold on to those values today and into my career work.
If it wasn't for the scholarship that you had, is there a possibility that you might have stayed in engineering?
There is a very real possibility, I think. I think if the grades weren't as big of an issue, I wouldn't have been forced to have to reevaluate what I was going to do. But I kind of chalk it up to, in the end, I think I'm happier where I am now than where I would have been. Just because with software, I don't know if I would have ended up still in a medical field. And that's kind of one of the things that I love about my job is I get to work with people that are innovating and creating and doing these really amazing things to help people. So
I noticed in the title of your degree, pre-medical's in there. So is medical school typical for what people do with that degree?
It can be, yep. So pretty much when we go into the program, they're very much like, it is what you make out of it. So some students, they go off and they start working like I did, where I graduated and I started working in illustration. Some students, they go on to do more general illustration. Some people go off to do tattooing. A lot of people I know, they've ended up doing medical tattooing. And then, yeah, one of the offsets is you could end up going to med school or specializing in like surgical medical illustration, where you're in the OR and you're working with people trying to do work there.
Is it, I know you started, you said you started off in software engineering. Do you do any type of software, I guess, engineering, any programming, coding stuff now, or is that just something in your past?
That's kind of more in the past. I kind of wanted to maintain what I was doing, but I found that especially, so I do illustrations, traditional line and color work, but I also do animation. I found that there are some values in knowing how to do like JavaScript in order to do coding for rigging animations so that you can move them around and make them do fun motions and actions. So I guess in that sense, I still kind of do it, but I no longer am really doing a whole lot in the sense of creating, well, oh, that's not true. I guess I built my website, so I still do some software stuff, but not really the way that I had originally planned.
Okay. And I noticed that, so I said in the intro that you're the founder of Legacy BioStudios. Was it always your plan to work for yourself?
I think so, yeah. I grew up in a household where my mom was well, she had her own dental clinic. It was hers, just her. And my dad kind of helped run the office. So, and when her kids got old enough, so it's me and my older sister, when we got old enough, we helped out. We helped in the lab. We helped keep things clean. We helped take care of charting. And I think watching her kind of gave me that confidence to go, oh yeah, it's possible to do your own thing. And it's okay to say that I don't want to work for somebody. I'd rather own something of my own, which for my dad's Black. He grew up in the Deep South, and something he was always lecturing about was it's important for people of color to have our own institutions, and a part of that is owning our own stuff. So I think for me, there was just this twofold of seeing it being done as well as it being told to me frequently. It's a value to be able to own what you're working on and have control in what you're participating in.
As a person who is self-employed, what are the pros and cons of it?
A pro, I would say, is I get to work on the projects that I want to. I can move to make myself more available for certain areas of expertise. It allows easier maneuvering around staying on the cutting edge of technology so that I'm able to know what's going on, know what people need, and most importantly, know how audiences are consuming their content. And so that way, I don't have to go to somebody up above me who probably has somebody up above them to say, hey, I've noticed that a lot of people are using TikTok, so maybe we should start working on that platform. I would definitely say a negative though is everything is because it's all through me. I have to make sure that I'm really on top of taking care of all the things. So many hats. It's not just doing the work. I gotta be able to market myself, take care of my finances, keep everything neat and orderly. Like, for example, the pandemic, when times like this come up, I don't have a safety net. So my husband, luckily, he's an essential worker. He's a civil engineer. So for him, you know, in times like this, he still has a job. We still have income. But for me, it definitely slowed my income down. So I'd say that's a con.
Right. So with your business, who's your typical customer?
I generally say pretty much anyone in a science or medical field. If you're trying to communicate with people, if you're trying to share an idea or a product, that's when you would hire someone like me. So I've worked on everything from user manuals to get processed through FDA regulation to creating posters for snail morphology. So it's a very wide spectrum of where I work. Right now, I think a lot of what I've been working on the most has been public health. So I worked with a couple projects that they're focused on people of color and how they are receiving their information about them. And so in one case, I did a series of animations to show how to, essentially it was for newborns, how to take care of your newborn, things to watch out for. And then right now, I'm actually working with my county I used to live in, Johnson County, on some dental inclusion posters. Actually, I have one right here. I always keep it pinned up because I'm super excited about creating this. So for that case, we created this series of well, we're hoping that it will become a larger series, but we started with an initial poster featuring a person of color, and I wanted to make sure that the big questions that people often ask when they go to a dental clinic were covered. So a lot of times it's, what is even a cavity? They don't know what that is. So if a dentist says, hey, you have a cavity, that doesn't mean anything to them. As well as another big question that they had was, I have a small child, are their teeth coming in properly? So those were a couple of the main things we wanted to really cover. So yeah, so kind of all over the place with people that I work with. Pretty much whoever is needing illustrations, my goal is to be available and to help them communicate with their audience.
How do most people find you?
Generally word of mouth, as well as I have a website, LegacyBioStudios.com. I also have an Instagram, which I post stuff that I've worked on, more personal projects, because I can't always share the projects that I've worked on. And then I also have a Twitter account, which talks a little bit more about a little bit more of the humanitarian end of stuff that I work on, and share the value and importance of that. A little less visual, a little bit more just chatty.
Okay. And the people that are the companies that you work with, is it more one-off work or is it more long-term engagements?
It really depends. Right now, I would say it's more one-off work, but there are situations where if somebody's working on a series, or if they know that they're going to be making updates to something that they've been working on, then they'll keep me in the loop so that I can continue to help. One of the biggest things that I don't think people always understand is that for me to best help a product or a company or an individual. It's really good for me to understand their why and where they're coming from. And a lot of times that requires a lot of conversation at the beginning. So I even if I'm just doing some free consulting at the very beginning, I'm always wanting to stay in the loop and know what's going on. And that gives me a better idea of who they're trying to talk to and how I can help.
So I'm just kind of curious as to the difference between what you do and then what a graphic designer does. Can you possibly explain that?
Yeah, so a graphic designer is really more about, they're going to be focused on, well, it depends on, I guess it depends on what kind of graphic designer. If you're somebody that's working on formatting, they're going to be worried about the flow of content, and they're going to want to make sure that whatever you're going through, it's easy on your eyes, that you understand it, that the color is appropriate for what you're doing. If you're talking about an illustrator that does, or a graphic designer that also kind of works in illustration, generally they're not going to get too medical or too technical. They did not have the amount of experience and expertise that somebody that went through the BPMI program is going to have. So I had to go through not only the art program, but I had to take all the bio courses, and anatomy, physiology, as well as things like evolution. So it's going to be a lot easier to communicate with me than it is to communicate with just a general graphic designer.
So you could do what they do, but they can't do what you do.
Yes. Yep.
Nice. That's some good, I guess, job security.
Yeah.
I was on your website and I saw that you started a podcast. So what's your podcast about?
Yeah, so my goal was to start a podcast about kind of the projects that I'm working on, to give the people that are, especially the smaller companies, individuals, nonprofits, to allow them a platform in order to kind of share what they're talking about and why what they're doing is important. For me, a big part of that is I wanted to give people that are working with marginalized groups an opportunity to share a little bit more about what they're doing with the general market, hopefully make it a little bit more mainstream so that they can get a little bit more support in what they're doing. It's amazing to me the stuff that people are working on the sidelines that if you're not in the know, you would never hear about it. And it's unfortunate because they are doing some amazing things to try and improve lives.
Nice. I worked in medical devices for a while, and when I did, I used to have to go to a lot of conferences, and when you go to these conferences, you go to these talks, and not obviously, but a lot of the times they have PowerPoint presentations, and they have a lot of text on the slides, and not only that, but I don't think they put all that much interest or all that much effort into the images that they would use. And so someone from your type of background, why do you think that is?
Because it's easy. I think a lot of times, especially I'm working with somebody that hired me to help them with a PowerPoint, they tend to think, well, I know what I'm talking about, so everybody else should know what I'm talking about too, right? And the unfortunate thing is when you go into a room, you're not 100% sure of who is in there listening to you. And so while simplified, sketches or what we sometimes call napkin sketches make sense to the person that's presenting, it can look just like scribbles to the audience. But I think, again, it comes down to this idea of if I understand it, then everyone else will understand it as well, which is why I really press know your audience so that you are going in prepared, and not only are you going in, telling your story and trying to let people know what you're doing, but you're giving them context so that when you're telling your story and you're referencing, figure whatever, they can look at that and they go, oh yeah. And then I always stress not too much text on those PowerPoints because you want them to listen to you. You don't want them reading your PowerPoint. But again, I always understand that there's this level of, one, I understand it, and two, if I forget what I'm talking about, it's written out for me. But unfortunately, that makes a drier presentation for the people listening.
For sure. I know you'd mentioned earlier that the majority of your business comes from word of mouth, but for any type of marketing efforts that you put forth, is it ever difficult to convince companies that they need someone like you to do their medical or scientific illustrations? And if so, how do you convince them?
All the time. It's always a little bit of a, especially if they're a startup or a younger company. I think a lot of times people go, well, maybe I don't need this because I can take photographs of what I'm working on. The invention of the camera is a beautiful thing. It's a very wonderful thing, except sometimes it's not going to do what you're working on justice. There are things that sometimes need a little bit more explanation, just because I've always been one of those people where I'm going to ask, how does this work? Why are you doing it this way? Is this the best way to do it? And if you're someone that doesn't plan on somebody asking you those questions, you can get away with simpler stuff, not having to worry too much about really having really good, crisp, understandable illustrations. And a part of talking to somebody is to really ask them to dig deep and say, hey, so who are you talking to? Who are you marketing to? When you go do this presentation, are they going to be a person that works in business, or are you going to be talking to another engineer? Because those are all very important. And usually at that point, somebody will go, you know what? Yeah, I'm working with some business execs. They probably won't understand all the details, so I will need to have some line illustrations to kind of go over stuff, something to point at, maybe some exploded view illustrations so that they can get an idea of what they're working with. And I think that works, in multiple fields, not just in medical devices, but like even right now, I'm working on some spearhead point illustrations for a publication. And the reason that we decided to do some illustrations is because when it comes to spearheads and flint knapping, if you've ever heard or seen, the idea of arrowheads using rocks in order to create points, there are special things about how the pressure and the motion of knapping creates these ripples that actually create the arrowhead. And so in this case, like right now, I have a resharpened spearhead. It's about 8,000 to 10,000 years old. I don't know if you can, let me grab this camera real quick so you can get a view to see it. If you can, there you go. So yeah, so in this case, when you take a photograph, you kind of just see the texture of the arrowhead itself. But if you were to get really, really close and to expose some light on it, you would essentially see ripples. And those are the actual motions of the flint knapping. And so in this case, we wanted to discuss the process of making as well as resharpening. And that is a key part of that conversation is the fine details that you just can't get with a photograph. So those are kind of some of the things that when you're talking to somebody, it's the little things that it may not seem important to them, but when you're telling a story, those are sometimes the key points.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And when it comes, and the crazy thing is, I've been so concerned with I guess verbal communication. I didn't really give all that much thought to the visual communication, because what do they say? An image, a picture paints a set of 1,000 words, something like that.
Yep,
Yeah.
picture's worth 1,000 words.
That's
yes.
it. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's the saying. But yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you're very much a proponent of that, kind of the lifeblood of your business for sure. So.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention on things that you're working on, Assata?
Oh, let's see. Well, okay, one for sure. So these dental anatomy posters, they are actually a part of a bigger project that I'm working on. And the goal is a little background. So my mom, like I mentioned earlier, is a dentist, and I still sometimes go in to help her when she needs an extra hand or two. And while I was in her clinic, a family came in. They were refugees from Africa, and when they came in, they went through the normal checkup. The kids went in the back, they got their checkup, they all signed their stuff and filed out. And talking to my mom, she was like, you know what, that went really, really well. And I was like, oh, okay, why wouldn't it go well? And she told me, well, they came 2 weeks ago and they would not let me look at their kids. They didn't even want to let me use an Explorer and look in the child's mouth in the front sitting area with them there, because there's this deep seated mistrust for Western medicine. Where they were from, if you go to the dentist, it's to have something taken out. There's really no preventative care, and they didn't understand why they had to go to a dentist in order to just go to school. They had out. And she said, I think because you look like them, they were a little bit more willing to trust me, and they allowed me to actually work on their kids. So we kind of did a little bit of research. I would try and talk with some of the families that would come in, kind of get a general idea of what's going on. And essentially we concluded, in a lot of cases, the people that are doing their healthcare are not people of color, but we can have something in the clinic that they can relate to, that they can see themselves in. So we are right now working on a little girl version of this poster, but these are free for anybody that thinks that they know a place that one of these would be a benefit, in a clinic, in a shelter, in a place where, a lot of people that are refugees or immigrants that would, benefit from seeing this. These are free and available. I usually say just DM me on Twitter or Instagram, but you can also send me an email at assata@legacyBioStudios.com. And I will get a couple of these posters to whoever needs them, wherever they are. Yeah, and then of course, when the little girl version comes out, I will be posting about that on my Instagram and Twitter as well, so that people know that poster is also available for sending out.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, that marks the end of another episode of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Assata.